Hello, my galactic quasars. This is Shade of a Hero by Creator of the Mind, read by Supernova Podfix. Chapter 13 Something's Up. Summary. Reporters break in, and Izuku doesn't have a good day. Izuku had thought that UA had been rather uneventful so far, aside from heroics. He had gone to class, done their work, voted for class president, and avoided pestering schoolmates. He really had no idea what was wrong with these people. Now, all he wanted to do was settle down and eat lunch, which was apparently asking too much, as right as he was about to start eating in his secluded little corner, the emergency bell went off. Students started scattering, pushing each other out of the way as they ran to the exit. Nezuko was caught up in the tide. This was less than ideal. Glancing at the giant glass windows that lined the halls, he quite easily figured out where the security breach had come from. A flood of reporters, the same ones that had been loitering around the school entrance, had entered through the gates of UA. But that isn't what caught his eye. Slinking around the back of the reporters was a person in a black hoodie. A guilty person, if Zuko had ever seen one. Well, one of the teachers would surely notice. After all, they were pro-heroes. Everyone at this goddamn school was an idiot. Oh, don't worry, it was only reporters. Only reporters! There was a school full of heroes and heroes in training, really so dense as to not realize that this was obviously a cover-up. They wanted to pull their hair out. Everyone was so dumb. Izuku was slightly less than pleased at the realization that the teachers did not, in fact, noticed that the reporters had been a cover-up. It was far too late to do anything about it at this point, as the person who broke in was already long gone. But he tried telling them anyway, and was promptly ignored by All Might. This was fine. It's not like he had pertinent information that needed to be shared or anything dangerous, or something dangerous would happen. Nope, not at all. He should have gone to Aizawa. At least then he would have had a chance. Ah well, too late now. He was impressed with how his new class president had managed the situation. He had calmed the rampaging kids and directed them in a way that kept people from getting hurt. While his methods were a bit unprecedented, they had worked, and the students had calmed enough to gain order. Obviously, he had voted for the right person. Coming home had been an experience. His mother had immediately accosted him about the UA break-in, worrying over him and checking for injuries. They had Hatsudan for dinner before he finally made it to bed. The day had been exhausting, and hearing about the class's upcoming field trip only added to the pit of dread that was quickly growing in his stomach. Chapter 14 Stuck. Summary. Part 1 of the USJ. The bus ride to the USJ was as uneventful as could be expected. Half the class was avoiding him, not that he minded, and the other half kept trying to talk to him, saying how awesome he was in the battle trials. All the while, Bakugo was sending him a glare that he was sure would have killed him, if that was at all possible. By the time they got there, he was ready to get the training over with. After finally getting there, they were escorted in and introduced to one of the others who would be helping to teach their lesson. As 13 explained the dangers of quirks, Izuku might have tuned out a bit. It wasn't as if the information was relevant to him, but then a spike of something went down his spine. He straightened his eyes, sweeping the facilities when he caught sight of what had been bothering him since the previous day. A swirl of unearthly purples and blacks undulated outward unnaturally as it grew. Two glowing yellow eyes peered out of the smoke, making eye contact with him before disappearing in the haze. A hand, calloused and dry, reached from the shadowy depths before a full body emerged, revealing the blue-haired stranger that had made his way into the school. Apparently, the heroes hadn't noticed. Behind the man, more figures emerged and filled the center plaza. A villain attack. The man, who now had hands covering his body, grinned. "Hello, heroes. We are the League of Villains." He paused, letting the young heroes in training soak in his words. "And we are here to kill the symbol of peace." Gasps rippled through his classmates. Aizawa shot his hand out. "Keep the kids safe," he ordered 13. They nodded, and Aizawa leapt at the gathering of villains. 13 started to usher them towards the door before the unearthly smoke blocked their way. "I'm afraid I can't allow you to leave." Ah, they were stuck. In the USJ and not at home. Izuku thought that in that moment, many of his classmates would have preferred being stuck. Homestuck, if you will. 13 put up their hand, but before they could do anything, Bakugo and another student, a redhead, jumped forward in attack. "Do you think we were just gonna stand by and let you keep us here?" Bakugo smirked. The shadowy figure gave an irritated huff. "Looks like I'll have to separate you all then." Before anyone could react, tendrils of black and purple smoke slithered out and coalesced around the class. In a blink of an eye, Izuku was free-falling in the open air towards the ground, surrounded by buildings. Swiftly grabbing out his hook, he dug it into the side of the structure, slowing his descent. He was in a fake city, obviously part of the USJ. This meant that the shadowy figure had a distance limit. Improbable, considering they had just used him to get in, or that he just didn't care enough to send them far. Before he could take in much more of his surroundings, an attack came from his left. Dodging out of the way and drawing his sword, he steadied his feet, looking for his attacker. What he found instead was a gathering of villains surrounding him. This wasn't good. Chapter 15. Light. Summary. Final part of the USJ arc. Shigaraki gets a glimpse of what he's dealing with and may be figuring out something more about himself, too. 30 minutes later, surrounded by fallen bodies in various states of physical health, Izuku pondered the surprising fact that villains of this world were about as hard to deal with as the shambling husks of bugs in Hallownest. Another swift dodge, followed by a hard whack with his nail, that was about as useful as a bat considering its lack of a proper edge, and a new body joined its predecessors. The crowd of villains, as if they even deserved to be called that, had thinned considerably. All that was left were a few idiots that had decided not to join the others and run. One last rush of opponents, and the last of them were dealt with. Jumping onto the fire escape of the building closest, he climbed his way to the top to gain his bearings. He appeared to be just a bit off from the central plaza, where he had last seen his teacher leaping into the horde of villains. To his right was a dirt mound that had been covered in ice, and the split one was obviously still alive, unless the enemy somehow had someone with an ice quirk that strong. On his left was a sinking ship with a cluster of villains passed out in the water, another situation his class seemed to have a handle on. Leaping across the buildings towards the plaza, he readied his nail. Shigaraki was prepared for a lot of things to happen when he invaded UA, but this wasn't one of them. He was prepared for Eraserhead and 13 to fight back and brought the appropriate amount of cannon fodder. He was prepared for the little hero brats to fight back, which is why he had Kurogiri teleports actions of their grunts to the different areas as they entered the to distract them. And while he was surprised that All Might hadn't been there initially, most plans didn't ever hold up upon first contact. All he had to do was lure him out. What he wasn't ready for, however, was a green blur to intervene his Nomu as it went to attack the hero brats. Behind the wall, usually this wouldn't be a problem, and it really shouldn't have been. The Nomu was made to stand up to All Might, for God's sake. Of course a small green-haired brat shouldn't have been able to make a dent, and yet here he was, staring at the kid who couldn't have been taller than 5 feet after he had just plunged his sword into his Nomu's skull and leveraged its brain out with bits of spine following. The plaza went silent. This was fine, obviously, as the new Nomu could just regenerate from it. Then, watching as if in slow motion, the kid lifted up his foot and smashed it down onto the slowly undulating brain as it tried to recover. A Nomu could survive that, couldn't it? There was no way that this hero brat beat his Nomu that could beat All Might with a fucking sword. It just wasn't possible. Meanwhile, during his freak out that the kid scrunched up his nose and shook off the gray brain matter that coated his shoe. Behind them, one of the other brats threw up. Leave. It wasn't a suggestion. You little. He lunged, his hand outstretched, ready to disintegrate the kid's face off. Before he could make it that far, a swirling purple vortex engulfed his hand. A good thing, too, as the brain-covered sword the kid was holding had also come up and certainly would have caused some type of damage. The sword was then steadily pointed at his throat, as again the kid repeated that one word. Leave. This time more forceful. This time accompanied by a shiver that went down Shigaraki's spine, as the shadows around them seemed to stare at them. Thousands of tiny white eyes peered at him from the now black shadows. A blink, and they were gone. He would never talk about what shook him up so bad. A slight nod of his head, and a step back into the swirling portal that had appeared behind him, and he was gone. But something in him screamed for vengeance. Maybe not at that moment, but when they were stronger, when they burned with the golden light they used to hold, when they could finally get rid of the pest once and for all. He didn't get sleep that night. Chapter 16. Aftermath. Summary. What happens after the USJ? Izuku gets taken in for questioning, and the teachers and Nezu get a glimpse of what Izuku really is. When Hisashi had heard what was happening at the USJ, he had immediately readied himself and took off after the rest of the staff. They had just burst through the doors, steeling themselves for any gruesome scene that could greet them. What they hadn't readied themselves for was the lack of a threat. All the bodies that had been strewn across the plaza were beaten in a way that Hisashi recognized as his husband's. All except one. A hulking mass of black was lying on the pavement with a gaping chasm where a brain should have been. Standing next to the body was Midoriya, holding a dull blade that splattered in brain matter. It didn't take a genius to put two and two together. After rounding up the rest of the kids, Midoriya had been whisked away for questioning. He had tried handing over a shock blanket. The kid barely seemed responsive, but as he held it out, he was met with cold eyes that didn't appear to hold an ounce of guilt. Those eyes were looking straight into his soul, picking him apart piece by piece in a gruesome examination, and he wanted to run. Run as fast and as far as he could. He just needed to get away from that thing before it killed him. Those eyes had shaken him to his core. Those weren't the eyes of a child, and when he really thought about it, he didn't think they ever had been. Nezu realized all too abruptly that he wasn't prepared to meet Midoriya Izuku in the flesh. Something about the boy sent his instincts into hyperdrive. They screamed at him to run from the obvious threat, from the predator that would kill him if he let it have the chance. However, he was above his instincts. He wouldn't be ruled by them. He was better than that. But now that he was in the same room as the boy, he began to wonder if maybe he shouldn't have brushed them off so easily, because what sat in front of him surely could not have been a human child. A human didn't have eyes that were just a shade too dark. Humans didn't sit so still that you questioned if they were even breathing. Humans didn't have a shadow that long and dark that undulated and almost appeared to have eyes that tracked you as you moved. He honestly didn't blame the poor cop that was all but cowering in the corner while occasionally tossing quiet questions to the thing that sat in the chair. When he entered the room, the man met his eyes with obvious relief, as Nezu waved him away. After he seated himself on the chair across from Midoriya, he let them sit in silence for a moment before asking his first question. Why did you kill it? Dark eyes slowly blinked at him, and a head full of green hair tilted in a way that, from afar, might have looked normal. It was going to kill them. The words left its mouth in a slow lit, like a piano chord, with one note just slightly out of place. So, I killed it first. Nezu nodded in acknowledgement of the answer before asking the question that had been filling his mind. How did you kill it? The room was silent as the thing in the chair across from him raised its eyebrows, and Nezu was sure if it was capable of showing emotions, it would have looked bemused. I tore its brain out. Before he can ask more, a woman burst into the room, and the monster in front of him shifted back into a boy. Izuku! A portly woman with dark green hair rushed to the monster, now boy, sitting in the chair. Are you okay? Did you get hurt? The boy's mouth twitched virtually imperceptibly, and his eyes softened. Holding his hands up, he signed a quick, I'm fine. And then he was immediately swept up into a hug by his presumed mother, tears streaming down her face. He got up and slowly walked out, careful not to disturb the mother-son duo. In the hallway was Detective Sukakachi, quietly consoling the cop that had been questioning Midoriya. That boy, Sukakachi wavered there, not quite sure what he wanted to say. He's not normal. I know, Nezu said with a sigh, but there's not much we can do about that. Is he safe? Sukakachi was looking him in the eyes, tremors running through his body as fear finally started to fade. I don't know, he finally said. I don't know. Chapter 17. Pickup. Inko gets a call from the police station about Izuku. She goes to pick him up while worrying about what state she'll find him in. Inko wasn't sure how to feel. Ever since Izuku had been a child, he always had such a heroic spirit, even if people didn't notice because he never really showed his emotions. On a memorable occasion, she found a 6-year-old Izuku gently cradling an injured bat in his hands. She still remembered his small voice, which he rarely used, rasping out a, "Help it, please." She had taken him to a wildlife rehabilitation center where he insisted on staying until he knew the bat get proper would get taken care of. When she first heard that Izuku had gotten into UA, she was so proud, but that didn't overshadow the anxiety she felt. She was proud because her little boy had proven that he wasn't going to let the world hold him back. But still, what if he got hurt? What if she lost the most precious thing she had in her life? She let him go nonetheless, and her worries started easing as he would come home more relaxed than she had seen him in a long time. He even talked about his teachers a bit, which was basically singing his praise for Izuku. But some things hadn't changed, like the fact that he never came home with friends. It hurt seeing her Izuku so alone when she knew what a big heart he had behind the cage he had put around it. When she got the call about the villain attack, the only thing she felt was dread. She was so sure that Izuku had been severely injured, or even worse, killed. The officer on the phone had told her that something had happened to him, so she had immediately rushed over. Izuku was fine, which was a relief, but he had apparently killed someone. Later, she would find out it was closer to a something. She couldn't believe what she was being told. Izuku wouldn't do something like that, would he? Even though it had been in self-defense, the police had taken him in for questioning. A flash of irritation ran through her. Weren't they supposed to have the parents there before they began questioning? Shoving her way past the guard, she burst into the interrogation room. On one side of the lone table was a plain-looking man in a trench coat and a small mouse-looking being. They were obviously at least uncomfortable around her son, like everyone was around her son. Another stab of irritation filled her. Why could nobody see that her son wasn't the monster that many people told her he was? He was a child, for God's sake. You think people would be able to understand that even if he acted a bit differently than others around him? On the other was her son. If she hadn't been the one to raise him, if she hadn't been the one to care for the star-burned shapes and scratches that he insisted didn't bother him, she wouldn't have noticed the almost imperceptible anxiety that he was obviously feeling. She was getting out of here now. Izuku! She rushed over to her son, gently cupping his face and scanning him over for any injuries that he could have been hiding. Are you okay? Did you get hurt? He brought up his hand, citing a small, I'm fine. Immediately, she pulled him out of the chair and into a hug, tears pricking at her eyes. Resting a hand through his hair, she murmured a soft, let's get you home, and led him out of the station. Chapter 18. Reminisce. Summary. Aizawa and Hisashi have crises, and Uraraka starts planning. Shota hadn't slept the past 2 nights. It wasn't unusual for him not to get sleep, though he could usually catch a nap between his patrol and class. His lack of sleep was for a very different reason than usual. He was sure that Hisashi had also taken note of the way he was acting. After all, he was having the same problem. Both of them were worrying over the same subject, but for completely different reasons. Shoto was worried about Midoriya. Killing in the way he had wasn't normal. He'd seen enough murders to tell. He had taken no joy out of killing the Nomu. He did it simply because he had to, because there was no other choice. He also didn't appear to feel bad about it either. He did it with an efficiency that spoke volumes about how used to the act he was. But Shota had done his research since he found out that Midoriya was in his class, and the chances that Midoriya had been routinely killing people was slim to none. So how did he learn to act that way? It made him wonder if he missed something when it came to Midoriya. Hizashi, on the other hand, was being kept awake by images of cold eyes, of shadows stretching around him, suffocating him. He wasn't sure what his husband saw in that thing, Midoriya, but he couldn't see it. Maybe he hadn't been around him long enough, only having him for English, and the kid rarely spoke. Or maybe it was the scene of him standing over the still form of a monster that was supposedly strong enough to beat All Might. But his instinct screamed that if he that kid left that kid to his own devices, someone was going to die. And he didn't know whether that someone was going to be friend or foe. But he was willing to try pushing past that for Shota. He was willing to try and learn what his husband saw in the kid, the thing, monster, abomination, but he wasn't sure if he ever would. Shifting on his back, he flung his arm over his eyes. If only this had been a normal year. If only the class had normal kids. He wouldn't be worrying about whether his husband was going to disappear one day and never be found because of one student that barely reached past his hip. Unbeknownst to either, there was another person who was awake thinking about Midoriya. Ochako, up and pacing around her room, trying to figure out how to get the small boy to train her.